Okay, let's begin. So for people that don't know anything about the play, could you tell us a bit about what it's about?
So essentially, my grandfather, Philaktis Aristokleos, wrote a memoir about his experience as a prisoner of war in World War II. And with the help of George, we've selected some stories which we used a professional translator to translate, and then George dramatized into this theatrical monologue, which we've generated in this particular point in time to commemorate the 80th um, uh, anniversary since the ending of the war. The theatrical performance toured various heritage sites in Yorkshire in the VE week, which started on the 7th or 6th of May. I think it was 6th of May 2025. And we've been asked to bring it to London.
The piece is translated into English by Maria Ioli Karolidou, who has an excellent knowledge of the English language, but also is a director and writer herself. And she was able to really find a language which is very easy to speak. The original text is written in Katharevousa, which is a bit of a more ancient, it's in between ancient Greek and modern Greek. So it's language that is used in the early 20th century. So it's a bit more refined than the everyday modern Greek that we use. And our performer is Stylianos Thomadakis, who was able to take on this huge task of performing this 30-minute monologue, but also performing all the characters that converse with Philaktis in the piece. So he's got maybe an additional 15 characters he's portraying on stage. That was a very exciting task and challenge for him on stage, but we wanted to create that in order to sustain the momentum of the monologue and just to ensure that it's not our traditional monologue storytelling, but we go beyond to a much more exciting form of storytelling.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. So you say the play is based on your grandfather's experiences.
Yeah.
Why is it important to you to tell his story?
Well, I grew up listening to these stories for many years. He didn't write the stories down until he was in his late 70s. I think the book was published when he was 80 years old. So I grew up with memories of those stories, and as an academic at this point in my life, I thought it was a nice time to stop and actually look at them closely, to try and understand why he chose to tell the particular anecdotes he did, what commonalities the stories have, what features these have, and ultimately in a book that I'm working on presently, the idea is to compare them with other stories found in other memoirs that were similarly published later in life by older veterans of that same kind. So I looked for other memoirs that were similarly British Army, prisoner of war specific, long narrative in nature, European theatre of war specific. And the idea is to look at the commonalities or differences, I suppose, that that will emerge in analysis.
Okay, so this work actually has a lot of connections with other work that you're doing at the moment as well.
Yes, in a sense, this kind of started as a kind of research project, but the project that I'm engaging in with Georgia at the moment is a sort of side project that runs parallel to this sort of dramatization adaptation.
Okay, well that actually brings me on to my next question, which is for you, George. What was it like for you to adapt these memoirs for the stage? And did you have any struggles with that?
It was wonderful when Christiana introduced me to this memoir that is she's so passionate about. So the first thing I did was to read the 253 pages of this memoir. And while reading it, I would highlight the stories that I felt that could really provide dramatic material for us. And out of those, we decided to select 25 stories, which offer a kind of different retelling of that period. We were very much interested in decolonizing the memoir canon by introducing those Cypriot prisoner stories. Phylaktis was working for the British, but he was one of the Cypriots that worked for the British during the time. So we wanted to focus on that Cypriot element. And that's the reason we are bringing this work after the invitation of the Cyprus High Commissioner and the Cultural Attaché to the Cyprus Week to tell the Cypriot stories of those who are prisoners. And I feel that the material is so strong. And even though we have had the Yorkshire tour, we performed this 14 times at different venues in Yorkshire, whether it's the Armory's War Museum or the York Museum or the Eden Camp and the University of Leeds. On this London version is a new revised version with the addition of 5 new stories focusing completely on the Cypriot experience. So even if somebody has seen it, we've got some new material and surprises, really focusing on that Cypriot experience. And we feel that in a way now, because for the previous version, our audiences were possibly a bit younger audiences. On this occasion, we're able to introduce more adult material, more difficult material, and material that deals even more explicitly with death and the conditions that were surrounding the war prisoners at the time.
Right, yeah, that's, I mean, I think it's very important to hear. We usually, when we think of the war, we usually just hear things from a British English perspective, don't we? And no one ever thinks about all the ethnic minorities that were actually involved in helping Britain. So yeah, very, very important. And very special, I think. It's something very different that we haven't really seen before. You say that, so the show has been performed in Yorkshire already. How do you feel about having the show performed at Theatro Technis, where it's likely there'll be more Cypriots than where you were performing before? To be frank.
We are very excited to perform it for a mostly Cypriot audience at the Theatro Technis. And as I said, we made sure that the stories that focus on the Cypriot experience. And if we think about the thematic, the 3 thematic, we've got different kind of themes in the piece, and we're focusing on the hygiene. We are interested about the love relationships that existed or did not exist within the camp, but also one of the main axes is the theatre. So what kind of theatre existed in the Stalag at the time? And we know that there was Garagiozis, which is a very Cypriot art form, a puppetry that is really particular to Cyprus. And we were delighted that one of the stories focuses on Garagiozis, but also how theatre provided a sense of escapism. So the prisoners would perform, for example, The Merchant of Venice, and they would borrow costumes that the Germans provided from the Berlin State Theatre. So those connections are very important to us to see how they presented those stories at the time to keep the prisoners entertained, and also how, for example, aspects such as the costume later on became vehicles for escape. So some of the costumes were used for one of the couples to dress as a man and woman and escape from the actual camp. So for us, those thematic links, those fantastic interconnected thematic unities allowed us to focus on the experience, but with that Cypriot, in a way, tinge to the work. Also, what was really important is to use Christiana as a main research resource for us, who had direct access to Phylaktis, and she gave us some very, very useful information about his physicality, his character. And we only have one piece of one interview that he gave for the Cyprus Broadcasting Corporation. And from there, we were able to distill the way he spoke, some of his hands, choreography, as we call it, the card choreography, and some of his gestures were distilled and absorbed in the way we directed the piece. And also, we're very much interested to present, we cannot really imitate or present Phylaktis as he was, but what we wanted to do is present in a new way his stories. So we want to allow those stories to remain alive. They were very, very important in Christiana's upbringing. She remembers all of those stories being told to her amongst her cousins and siblings. And what is really important is to see how those stories can be told today in a new way, and just to remind us that in a way that we tell those stories, not to remind us of the war, but to tell those stories to remind us how we are able to survive it.
Yeah. And just to add to that, we'll make sure that we have a Greek actor who will deliver the stories, dramatized, of course, somewhat appropriate for the stage in English, because we're obviously performing in London. But we'll make sure that there's enough Greek that we sprinkle the performers with, just to remind the audience that the original narratives were actually oral narratives, Greek narratives, Greek Cypriot narratives even. You get some elements of the Greek dialect, the Greek Cypriot dialect, but you also get a form of Greek Katharevousa specifically. We had to, obviously there was an interesting transition, because these are oral accounts that were then written down into a memoir, and we're trying to recreate the oral experience. But what we see is some sort of reenactment of what featured what happened in those stories, with some Greek sprinkled in as a way of reminding the audience that these are Greek accounts.
Yeah, and I think even for non-Cypriots in the audience, it's still very interesting to hear that, and sometimes you don't need to understand the language to understand what's happening. I want to go back to the talk of the memoirs, and that there were so many different stories in them. How did you decide what stories to include? And is there anything about Phylaktis that isn't in the plays that you would like to share?
The selection process was a very interesting one, because what we had to do is, out of the 253 pages, just to find the ones that are more appropriate to the stage. So we, for the first version, we were able to provide a version that it was able to be watched by younger audiences. But on this occasion, we were much freer to choose even much more explicit material, and material that actually delves with death. But at the heart of it, I think we worked over those three interconnected dimensions of the prisoner existence that I talked about earlier. So about hygiene, how they were able to live under those very difficult conditions, and with the minimal food provisions that they had. The secondary was the love aspects and any kind of romance that developed in the barracks, either amongst the prisoners or amongst prisoners and factory workers when they went to work outside. And thirdly, I think we chose stories which really linked to the aspect of theatre. So we had these three thematic units, and then we populated them with stories that deal with that. Obviously, death is accompanying all three strands. Just as a reminder that during those years, everyday life was really every day surrounded by death. And we tried to include some humor and some comedy, but what we wanted to do is just provide a balanced, dramatic, dramaturgical arc that can keep the audience excited by providing also stories that have not been told before.
And also what we plan on doing is there will be an introduction at the start of the play, followed by 2 parts of the play, some indication of what kinds of stories is going to be given. And then at the end of the about 30-minute performance, there's going to be a lecture, if you like, a mini lecture from me where I analyze the stories, and I even get to play the video recording of Phylaktis that I shared with George and our actor Stylianos, and I'll explain a little bit about what it is that I am doing with the particular stories in analysis. So there will be what we call it a lecture performance, in the sense that there will be a performance, but there will also be some analysis afterwards for those interested. And George will also give an insight into the adaptation process at the end. He'll also deliver a speech before we close.
Yeah,
coming back to your question about whether there is something that's not in the memoir, obviously Christiana is a living archive of Phylaktis. She shared with me the piece of information that he loved the song Lily Marlene, and that he used to whistle it many years after he returned from war. So in a way, for that, gave us a very important aspect of the show. We are including a lot of music in the show, and what we've got is that piece echoes throughout the piece, and it provides a thread between present and the past, trauma and survival, but also it functions as memory, but as rebellion from Phylaktis himself, that he comes to terms with his past and he's able to whistle it years after as a thought, as an act of resilience, that he was able to come back, be alive, and continue his life. So there are small aspects that are not in the memoir that Christiana shared with us, and we were able to use them in the piece.
It's lovely. I think that's really important, because not everything, sometimes the most personal things aren't always written down, aren't they? And there's always, everyone has their own little quirks and things like that. So it's really nice that you've managed to include that in the play. Sorry, look at my other questions.
Can I ask Christiana very quickly something? Christiana, you do have siblings, yeah?
Yes, my sister, yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
So my next question will be going in a bit of a different direction. Obviously the play is telling experiences of the Second World War, but do you think there is any parallel with current tensions happening over the world today that your audiences might be able to relate to?
I suppose the connection that we want to make between the current situation is that what we're looking at is a very multicultural veteran community, the British Army of World War II. And I think it's important to celebrate the multiplicity of ethnicities that came together in order to endure and respond to the global conflict of that period. And I think it's a powerful reminder that diverse nations do need to unite across ethnic lines in order to ultimately respond to global crisis.
Yeah, it's about it can never be one person's problem. It's everyone's problem, isn't it? And that's it's very relevant to today.
And I think it's a piece about resilience and hope, and just remember that we always need to look for the light and remain positive to be able to get out of very difficult situations that surround us every day.
Yeah, you need that attitude to create change, definitely. I've got one more question, and then you guys can share if there's anything else you'd like to share. Um, do you have any future plans for Memoirs of a Prisoner of War, or any plans of collaborating together again?
Mhm. Christiana, would you like to talk about the My Learning and
Yes,
opportunity?
yeah. So one of the things we are currently doing is we are generating some learning resources for teachers to use with students. So the stories that you'll listen to being performed on the 18th of July, we've also audio recorded for what's known as the My Learning platform. And we have a team that is currently developing learning resources to go with those specific audio recordings. I don't think they will end up using all 20 of them. They'll probably only use a handful of them. But we're working closely with them to make sure that they create some resources that can be used for as long as the next 5 years. I think they'll stay on the website, and we can let all of our partners, all the museums and the schools that we collaborated with, have the link when it's available. It should be around October some point, and then your audiences can get hold of the recordings if they like for use in the classroom.
Oh, okay. So you really have all these different forms of archives that it will say creates a lasting impact.
Yeah, we'd like there to be like a legacy for this particular project going forward. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
The project is funded by the LARI, the University of Leeds LARI scheme, the Impact Accelerator account, which is very much interested how can this research have an impact beyond and outside the academy. So we have been very interested to see how this work has reached audiences that are not academics or students, whether it's younger audiences or the general public. And the work exists also in the form of a video, and we have already interest for that work to be presented either at academic conferences in the future, either live or recorded. And we are very excited to have this piece, and we are interested in developing it further in the future within an environment which allows for this work to be shared not only as an academic resource, but also as a resource for impact and social change.
Oh, so lots and lots of plans for the future. That's great
Yeah.
to hear.